Today we're going to talk about my good buddy Mark Fawcett's cover photo from Snowboarder magazine's 30th anniversary.
Greenland. The name conjures up images of a vast and desolate landscape of snow and ice. I first saw Greenland on a flight home from Europe. When I got home, I discovered that the Greenland government had plans to develop an off-season training site for alpine and Nordic racers. Well, that was the only excuse I needed to go see Greenland firsthand.
So this trip really originated as a brainchild from a crew in Maine who were wanting to develop a ski area based off of a retired cruise line ship. And to date, I still think it's a great idea. It'd be a cool spot for a resort. And Powder, along with Snowboarder, got a hold of it, and we put a crew together, 2 young snowboarders, 3 really senior skiers, and we took off for Greenland. As far as we had researched was the first real media trip to the Big Island. We stationed ourselves in these little huts. There was a concept to build some sort of a resort there. It would be amazing. But logistically, it's way out in the middle of nowhere. And it took us a couple different airplanes and 2 different boats, one through the open North Atlantic and one deep into the fjords to get to this area called Fawcett, not far from a little town called Monitsuk. There were lots of places the helicopter would land us, and we talked about it in the evening after, and they were like, no one's ever been up in these regions. Like, they're not there. We don't even really have maps for them in '92. And the Aboriginal community there, they stuck to the water. There wasn't anything growing up in the mountains or any reason for them to go way up into these glaciated areas, etc. So we might as well have been stepping on the moon every time. The huge irony of this shot is that it was this big collaboration during the peak of the Cold War between skiers and snowboarders. And it was a collaboration of skiers and snowboarders sort of doing this exploration trip together. One thing that was really interesting I found on this trip is just actually how well we all got along. So it was Trevor Peterson, Mike Hattrip, and John Egan, 3 super experienced skiers, free skiers, like lived and spent all their time in the mountains, did a ton of filming, and 2 pretty greenhorn snowboarders. And yeah, we had quite a bit of experience for young guys and in the limelight and such as new pro snowboarders, but Dave Sione and myself. And we got along so well with these skier guys. It was amazing, just like lifelong friends now. So the shot was from May of '92. And 25 years later, and funny enough, they kept it completely silent from myself. And all sorts of people knew about it before I even did, so it was a great surprise for me. You feel pretty honored to get this out on the cover again. I gotta say, big hats off to the photographer, Steve Casimiro. Back in the day, you had to be pretty efficient and almost stingy with your film. And he knew when to hold the button down and when not to. Yeah, let's showcase a real nice powder run with a snowboarder and a couple of skiers. And the shot that came out of it was the epitome of, and probably the last big stab at skiing by snowboarders. We had burned through so much film that week that he ran out of film before we actually got to this run. This was one of the last runs we did while in Greenland on that trip. And it was minus 17, somewhere about that. And that's why my beard is, well, of course, just the powder too, but frosty, really cold. Once they got up to speed, that flotation just didn't exist. And it was so hard to keep the skis from purling. And that's exactly what happened in the 5th frame. As you can see, John Egan starting to go in, and not only over the bars forwards, but also in towards me. And I was just finishing a toe turn, just starting a heel turn. You would see that we actually kissed bases ever so briefly. I felt this little knock on the bottom of my board, And that's also the reason my eyes were closed. Is I thought for sure it was going to be a big tangled mess. I'll never forget, about 3 or 4 weeks after we returned home, my really good friend Malcolm Norman at Sims Snowboards calls up. I answered the phone and he's like, dude, you are not going to believe the shot we have of you. He said it's insane. He said it's just the antithesis. It's exactly what we want to run with from a marketing perspective. He said it's a beautiful shot, it's crisp, and it's just such a great stab at the ski industry. So originally when Sims, first got a hold of the shot, they're like, how do we maximize our usage out of this? And of course it was a no-brainer and easy for them to do the poster, but they wanted something different than a cover, etc., and wanted it to be labeled Sims a little bit more. So they actually bought the centerfold of Snowboarder that fall of '92, and when it opened up, the shot said etiquette, and the back sides were a picture of Sean Palmer, and it said attitude, and the other fold on when you folded it back inwards was Noah Selaznick, and it had another phrase of sorts. And I think they caught as much flack for how they labeled it as they did the shot itself. So interestingly, in '92, this was probably the peak of skiers versus snowboarders, and we had been accepted as a sport and accepted at ski areas for the most part by this time. And, there was still some animosity, and snowboarding had this great momentum as the alternative, the rebel thing to do. And this shot was like iconic from that perspective. And it sort of really solidified that natural selection of like what's superior out there. I think a lot of it was just that we were really young and we were something different, and that's what, a big part of what made snowboarding popular, and that striving to do something different on the snow. So this shot obviously came with a lot of controversy. Sims Snowboards actually received a lot of hate mail and negative letters from skiers and ski groups about the shot, and they also received a lot of fan mail about it. One in particular was pretty funny from a seniors snowboard club out of Bend, Oregon, and it read along the lines of, "It's so great for you to display an image of a senior snowboarder in your centerfold and your center spread." And it was pretty funny. I guess at a distance, if you're old and you weren't wearing your glasses, it does look like I'm a bit of an old man there with a grayed out beard. And funny enough, at 20 years old, it looks like I had more gray than I do now. So sadly, I remember this gorgeous Juicy Fruit, we called it the Juicy Fruit uniform and board, and being 20 years old and you're a pro snowboarder, you still were relatively broke. And I remember selling it at a windsurf swap at Winddance for $75, the whole uniform, and the board as well. Couldn't even tell you who I sold that to, but I certainly sold both of them, just sort of in that mindset, hey, it's worth more this year than it is next spring, so I'll just unload junk, just don't keep anything. And now, super regret ever letting go of so many things. So much of this stuff I wish I'd kept, and then so much stuff that I've kept I wish I'd gotten rid of. To date, 25 years later, it was still by far the snowboard trip of my life. Amazing snow, incredible terrain, and every run we did was a first ascent. And that was really a great feeling.